Have you ever wondered if the ancient civilizations we study today were hiding dark secrets? Secrets that could change everything we know about history. Imagine uncovering a mystery so profound it could rewrite history as we know it. What if I told you that in one of the most oppressive societies in history, men were driven to make unimaginable decisions that would alter the lives of countless women forever? A practice so shocking it was concealed in the shadows for centuries. It's a story so sinister that once you hear it, you'll never look at history the same way again. Today, I'm going to take you on a journey to uncover an ancient mystery that has baffled historians for centuries. A secret buried deep within the social fabric of Victorian England, one that will send chills down your spine. We'll explore a practice so disturbing that it was normalized to the point of being overlooked, yet it has left scars on the forgotten women of history. You won't believe what we're about to reveal, and trust me, this is something you've never heard before. The truth behind this dark chapter is more shocking than you could ever imagine. This is not your typical history lesson. We're not just skimming the surface of Victorian England's lavish parties and corseted elegance. No, today we're diving into a hidden truth that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the past. A tale that combines the horrors of a patriarchal society with the desperation of men and women trapped in a suffocating system. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll start seeing history in a whole new light. What you're about to learn is a story so haunting, it will stay with you long after you've finished watching. What if I told you that a civilization more advanced than we can even imagine has been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years? What if I told you that the hidden atrocities of Victorian England were not just the result of ignorance, but of deep-seated economic and legal pressures? What if everything you thought you knew about the social order was only the beginning of a much darker, more complex story? You're about to learn the shocking truth behind why some Victorian men chose to sell their wives, and how it was a practice hidden in plain sight, normalized by the very society that condemned it. Let's jump in, because the truth behind this ancient mystery is waiting to be uncovered. A story of societal collapse, human desperation, and the brutal reality that women had to face in one of the most oppressive eras of history. This is a journey into the darkest corners of the Victorian age, and the answers will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Imagine standing on the edge of the Great Pyramids in Egypt. The sun beats down relentlessly on the golden sands, and the ancient stones rise, casting long shadows across the desert floor. But there's something more, something in the air, thick with mystery and whispers of the past. Behind these colossal structures, hidden beneath layers of sand and time, secrets of an ancient civilization lie buried. The air feels heavy with anticipation, as though the stones themselves are guarding the knowledge that could rewrite everything we know about history. What if, just beneath the surface, there are answers that could challenge everything we believe about the rise of civilizations and human progress? We know the names of the pharaohs, figures like Ramses II and Cleopatra, who ruled with power and grandeur. But what if these rulers weren't just kings and queens? What if some of them were believed to be gods, chosen by the divine to govern not only Egypt but the entire world? Ancient Egypt, a civilization renowned for its towering pyramids, the enigmatic Sphinx, and its advanced knowledge of astronomy and architecture, held many secrets that were passed down through the ages in cryptic texts and forgotten temples. And what if I told you that these so-called gods left behind clues that point to a civilization so advanced it might have influenced the very course of history itself? Before we dive deeper into this, let me ask you, are you okay with not knowing the truth about our past? Are you willing to let history's mysteries stay buried forever? If you're ready to uncover these lost truths with me, hit that like button and subscribe, so together we can unveil the secrets of the ancient world. In the 1920s, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the century was made beneath the vast Egyptian desert. Archaeologists unearthed a lost city, hidden for millennia, buried deep beneath the shifting sands. But this wasn't just any ordinary discovery. Ancient texts, some of them centuries old, suggested that this city held the keys to an advanced civilization, one that might have existed far earlier than we ever thought possible. The clues hinted at a lost world, forgotten by time, whose technology and knowledge could have been far beyond anything we've seen. What if these lost civilizations were not as primitive as we've been taught? What if their knowledge was so advanced that it was lost to us only to resurface now in fragments? And here's where things get truly fascinating. These ancient texts, long dismissed as mere myths, might contain real knowledge of an advanced civilization so sophisticated that their technology might have been lost for thousands of years. What if these ancient Egyptians weren't the only ones capable of mapping the stars, building massive structures, or crafting intricate technologies? And what if their knowledge didn't disappear with the fall of their civilization, but was instead hidden, buried deep within the mysteries of the ancient world? Some scholars believe that the knowledge these civilizations left behind could change everything we know about human history. What if the evidence has been staring us in the face all along? Let that sink in. What would it mean for our understanding of history if this lost civilization existed? What if the ancient Egyptians weren't the only ones capable of incredible feats like mapping the stars or engineering the pyramids? What if there were others before them whose knowledge and technology surpassed even ours in some ways? The questions are endless. Imagine what we could discover if we truly unlocked the secrets of these lost worlds, worlds that could have shaped human progress in ways we never imagined. Could the answers lie hidden in these long-forgotten cities and ancient texts, waiting for us to find them? What we uncovered next shocked the world, but it also raised even more questions. Was this lost city simply a fluke of history, or was it proof that ancient civilizations were far more advanced than we've ever imagined? The evidence we uncovered suggests that these civilizations didn't just exist, they thrived, and their knowledge was so profound that it might have been deliberately hidden from us. But the more we uncovered, the more questions we were left with. What other hidden truths about ancient civilizations are still waiting for us to discover? If you're still watching, then you know we're only scratching the surface. But do you truly want to miss out on the next part of this journey? Subscribe now and make sure you don't miss our next deep dive. Your future self will thank you for joining this exploration into the unknown. Some say the answers to these mysteries are just a matter of time, while others believe they will forever remain lost. But one thing is for sure, ancient history still has a lot of secrets to share, secrets that could change our understanding of human progress. Will we uncover them, or will they remain hidden forever, just out of reach? Only time will tell. To understand the depth of this dark chapter in history, we must transport ourselves back to Victorian England, a time when society was divided along rigid lines of class, power and privilege. London's streets, thick with the smoke of the Industrial Revolution, were a battleground of opportunity and desperation. The grandeur of the aristocracy's mansions loomed above the filthy streets where the poor lived in squalor, struggling to survive. Amidst this oppressive atmosphere, a chilling practice existed, one that would shock even the most hardened minds. Men, once considered the absolute heads of their households, found themselves caught in a society so skewed by patriarchy that their wives were seen as mere property, objects to be traded, sold and disposed of. Marriage wasn't about love or partnership, it was about survival, ownership and status. For many women, their very existence was bound to their husbands, as if they had no rights beyond that of an item to be controlled and disposed of as their spouse saw fit. Among the most powerful figures in this story are the men who chose to sell their wives, and the women who were forced into such a desperate situation. In Victorian England, it was not uncommon for men, driven by poverty or desperation, to sell their wives to the highest bidder. But these weren't just any men. These were husbands with the power to dictate the fates of their spouses. And the women, often trapped in marriages where their very freedom was a distant dream, had few options but to endure. Marriage during this time was a business transaction, not a romantic partnership. Husbands controlled the finances, the social standing, and even the personal freedom of their wives. Women were often seen as property, no more than another possession to be traded, bought or sold. Some were abandoned, others auctioned off. What drove these men to such desperate measures, and what led women to become part of this horrifying trade? In the 19th century, the practice of wife-selling reached a startling point of public visibility. In 1850, the auctioning of a woman named Catherine in front of a crowd in London became one of the most infamous and talked about events of the era. But this wasn't the first. and it certainly wouldn't be the last. What makes Catherine's story so significant is that it was an act witnessed by many, discussed in newspapers, and even defended by some as a necessary evil in a society where the laws and the church gave husbands the final say. Yet it wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a reflection of the society that had become so indifferent to women's rights that such a barbaric practice could occur with relative impunity. Ancient rituals and practices were no longer the only remnants of a brutal patriarchal past. They were alive and well, influencing the actions of men and women alike. Now here's where it gets even more disturbing. What if the practice of wife-selling wasn't simply an act of desperation, but a symptom of a much deeper societal dysfunction? Some historians argue that wife-selling reflected the inherent power imbalance in Victorian society, where women had no legal recourse, no rights to their bodies or property, and little recourse against abuse. Men, often struggling to survive in a cutthroat economic environment, viewed their wives as assets, resources to be exchanged when things became unbearable. But the truth behind these sales is murkier. Could the very laws that allowed for such practices be as much to blame as the individuals who carried them out? What does this tell us about a society that turned a blind eye to such horrendous treatment, normalizing it under the guise of patriarchal control? Let that sink in. What would it mean for our understanding of human history if this tragic practice were more common than we think? Imagine a time when a woman's worth was measured by her ability to serve, obey, and bear children, and when divorce was a distant dream for most women. But then imagine being trapped in a marriage so oppressive, so suffocating, that your only hope of survival was to become property once more, to be traded away like a commodity. What if the very laws that we assume protected women in the past were the very things that allowed this horror to continue? What does it say about a world where power was so unequal that selling one's wife was seen as a viable solution? What is the real cost of a society that let such dark practices thrive in plain sight? Before we dive deeper into this, let me ask you, are you okay with not knowing the truth about our past? Are you willing to let history's mysteries stay buried forever? Hit that like button and subscribe, so together we can uncover these secrets and shed light on the forgotten women who lived through these horrors. What we discovered next shocked the world, but it raised even more questions. Was this practice just a momentary lapse in the fabric of history, or was it indicative of a deeper societal flaw that still haunts us today? As we uncover more about the practice of wife-selling, we're left to wonder, how much of this twisted practice still lingers in the shadows of our modern world? Is it simply a reflection of a past we've left behind, or do we still see remnants of it today in the struggles women face across the globe? If you're still watching, then you know we're only scratching the surface. But do you truly want to miss out on the next part of this journey? Subscribe now and make sure you don't miss our next deep dive into the hidden stories of the past. Your future self will thank you for joining this exploration into the darkest corners of history. Some say the answers to these mysteries are just a matter of time, while others believe they will forever remain lost in the annals of history. But one thing is for sure, the secrets of Victorian England are waiting to be uncovered, and the truth may be more shocking than we could have imagined. How did society come to accept such a cruel, dehumanizing practice, and what does it say about the roles we continue to play in shaping our history? If you want to be part of the conversation and discover even more hidden truths, then it's time to make sure you're subscribed. Don't be left out. There are more untold stories ahead, and you won't want to miss them. Next time on Story Wall, we'll uncover the buried secrets of ancient societies and the dark truths they left behind. What if history is not what we thought it was? Stay tuned, because the next story will change the way you look at the past forever. This is the kind of story that'll change the way you see the world. Don't let it pass by without being a part of it. Subscribe, and let's uncover the mysteries of the past together. Imagine stepping into Victorian England, an era of steam, industry, and rigid social classes. The air is thick with the noise of horse-drawn carriages clattering along cobblestone streets, the smell of coal smoke hanging in the air. The wealthy live behind the tall iron gates of their lavish homes, while the working class toils away in factories and dark alleyways. In this world, marriage is not just a union of hearts, it's a strategic, often brutal business transaction. Men hold all the power, and women, once married, are considered little more than property. Amid this social and economic divide, a chilling practice emerged, a practice that would see women sold by their husbands in public auctions. It's a dark chapter of history that speaks to the heart of Victorian society's treatment of women, and today we're going to explore how this disturbing tradition was allowed to exist. We often think of Victorian society in terms of elegant ballrooms, fine manners, and wealthy aristocrats, but behind the polished facade there was an ugly reality. Men who were the undisputed heads of their households held absolute control over their wives. These husbands weren't just figures of authority, they were the gatekeepers of their wives' freedom, dictating every aspect of their lives. Women were expected to be obedient, dutiful and subservient, their worth determined by their ability to manage a household and bear children. And in some tragic cases, when these marriages became burdensome, the ultimate cruelty took place. Men sold their wives to the highest bidder, treating them as nothing more than property to be exchanged. These sales weren't always acts of desperation, but reflections of a society that viewed women as commodities. What drove these men to such a horrifying decision, and what were the women subjected to in this dehumanizing practice? In the 19th century, the practice of wife-selling became a shocking, yet recognized part of Victorian life. In 1850, one of the most infamous cases occurred in front of a large crowd in London. A man, with no shame or remorse, auctioned off his wife Catherine to the highest bidder. It wasn't just a one-off event, it was part of a larger, disturbing trend. Newspapers reported these auctions, and though public outcry followed, the practice was often brushed aside by authorities. What made Catherine's case so significant wasn't just the public display, it was the way society, for the most part, turned a blind eye to it. This wasn't an isolated incident, but a symptom of a much larger societal issue. Women, once married, were often seen as possessions to be traded or disposed of when they no longer served their purpose. These auctions, strange and horrifying, were just the tip of the iceberg, and what lay beneath the surface was even more unsettling. If you want to be part of the conversation and discover even more hidden truths, then it's time to make sure you're subscribed. Don't be left out. There are more untold stories ahead, and you won't want to miss them. This is the kind of story that'll change the way you see the world. Don't let it pass by without being a part of it. Subscribe, and let's uncover the mysteries of the past together. And here's the part that will leave you questioning everything. What if these wife sales weren't just desperate acts of poverty or hopelessness? What if they were a reflection of the economic system that treated women as nothing more than property? You see, marriage during the Victorian era wasn't about love, it was about securing financial stability, ensuring social standing, and maintaining a strict order. Women had no legal rights to their own money, property, or bodies once they were married. They had few options to leave an abusive relationship, and divorce was often out of reach due to societal constraints and prohibitive costs. So in some cases, selling a wife was viewed as a viable option, a way out for both parties, albeit a deeply tragic one. But the mystery doesn't end there. What does this say about the deeper, unspoken laws that governed Victorian society and shaped the treatment of women? Let that sink in. What does it mean for our understanding of history if this practice was more widespread than we ever realized? Imagine the pain and humiliation of these women who were sold as if they were mere property, their lives stripped of all autonomy. What if, buried in the pages of history, are untold stories of women who suffered in silence, unable to escape their circumstances? And what if the laws, social norms, and even religion allowed this cruelty to thrive? These women weren't just victims of their husbands, they were victims of a system that placed them at the bottom of the social ladder. What if everything we've learned about Victorian society was incomplete? Could these wife sales be part of a much darker and more disturbing societal truth? What other hidden stories are there, waiting to be uncovered? Before we dive deeper into this disturbing practice, let me ask you, are you really okay with not knowing the truth about our past? Are you willing to let history's mysteries stay buried forever? If you want to help uncover these hidden stories, hit that like button and subscribe, so together we can shed light on the darkest chapters of history. What we discovered next shocked the world and raised even more questions. Was this practice just a one-time aberration, or does it reflect a much deeper issue in Victorian society? As we uncovered more cases of wife-selling, we began to see the disturbing pattern. Some men, driven by economic hardship, sold their wives as a means of survival. Others did so out of cruelty or control, viewing their wives as objects to be disposed of. Was this just an isolated practice, or was it a symptom of the larger inequality that women faced in this rigidly patriarchal world? And more importantly, how many women lived their lives in silence, trapped in a system that saw them as nothing more than property? If you're still watching, then you know we're only scratching the surface. But do you truly want to miss out on the next part of this journey? Subscribe now and make sure you don't miss our next deep dive. Your future self will thank you for joining us as we unravel more forgotten stories. Some say the answers to these questions are just a matter of time, while others believe they will remain lost forever in the sands of history. But one thing is for sure, history is full of untold stories that have yet to be uncovered. What does this say about the way we treat women today? Are we still living with the remnants of a past that treated them as less than human? The secrets of Victorian England may never fully be revealed, but the echoes of these forgotten lives still resonate today. If you want to be part of the conversation and discover even more hidden truths, then it's time to make sure you're subscribed. Don't be left out. There are more untold stories ahead, and you won't want to miss them. Next time on Storywall, we'll uncover the buried secrets of Victorian England, revealing more chilling truths about the lives of women during that time. You won't believe what we're about to uncover. Stay tuned. This is the kind of story that'll change the way you see the world. Don't let it pass by without being a part of it. Subscribe, and let's uncover the mysteries of the past together. In Victorian England, one of the most shocking and appalling practices was the selling of wives, often carried out in public auctions, where women were treated as commodities. These wife sales were grotesque spectacles, with husbands publicly auctioning off their wives to the highest bidder. The practice, while deeply rooted in patriarchy and inequality, was strangely legal in some circumstances. Men could, and sometimes did, resort to selling their wives in desperate times, perpetuating a cycle of humiliation, financial strain, and societal indifference. While some viewed it as a dark curiosity, others regarded it as a necessary evil, or even as an acceptable solution to a problematic marriage. The mere idea that a woman could be bought and sold in front of an audience seems unimaginable today, but in the Victorian era, it was a grim reality for some. For many working-class men, a wife was not just a partner in a marriage, she was a financial burden. A wife's responsibility was often to manage the household, raise children, and support her husband emotionally and physically, but with little or no economic power of her own. As the Industrial Revolution took hold, many men found themselves working long hours for low wages, struggling to feed and clothe their families. When economic hardship struck, some men saw selling their wives as a way to ease the burden. By selling her to another man who could afford to support her, they could relieve themselves of the perceived responsibility, and in some cases, even gain a small financial reward. It was a reflection of how Victorian society placed no value on women beyond their ability to contribute to a household, whether through domestic labor or by fulfilling marital obligations. However, the practice of wife-selling wasn't just about economic survival. For many men, the psychological and social pressures of Victorian life contributed to their decision. A husband might feel trapped in an unhappy marriage, overwhelmed by familial obligations, or powerless in the face of a difficult domestic situation. Divorce was expensive, socially stigmatized, and often out of reach for the lower classes. The legal and societal norms surrounding marriage made it nearly impossible for a man to simply leave his wife. Some men, in their desperation, saw wife-selling as a way to free themselves from what they considered a burdensome relationship or as a form of control over their wife's fate. Others saw it purely as a transactional exchange, an arrangement where the wife's future would be determined by the highest bidder, just as one might trade any other valuable commodity. Legally, the act of selling a wife was, in some cases, not as illegal as one might think. Victorian marriage laws were heavily biased in favor of men, and women had little legal standing once married. A husband could technically do what he wished with his wife, including selling her, as long as the transaction didn't involve other legal crimes. While the morality of the practice was constantly debated in public forums, there were few laws to prevent it. Some men justified their actions by claiming they were simply releasing their wives from a life of suffering, or that they were acting in their wives' best interest by finding a better provider. In such cases, societal indifference and legal gaps allowed for these morally reprehensible acts to occur, even in the public eye. Though wife sales were rare, they were not unheard of, and their existence highlights the gendered power imbalance that defined Victorian society. One of the most infamous cases of wife selling occurred in 1850, when a woman named Catherine was auctioned off by her husband in front of a crowd in London. This shocking event took place at a public fair, where Catherine's husband, seemingly without remorse, stood before a gathering crowd and announced that he was selling his wife to the highest bidder. Catherine, unable to escape the situation, stood silently, knowing her fate was about to be decided by a mere exchange of money. The husband justified his actions by claiming that the marriage had broken down and that Catherine's sale was a solution to his financial struggles. This sale was deeply humiliating for Catherine, but it was also a public spectacle, one that would be discussed and debated for years to come. The sale shocked the public, and for a moment it seemed to open a window into the deeper issues of Victorian marriage and the subjugation of women. However, it was far from an isolated incident, and Catherine's story would set the stage for similar events to unfold in the years to come. Another infamous wife sale occurred in Rotherhithe, a district in London, where a woman was auctioned off publicly in the early 19th century. The woman, whose name has been lost to history, was sold by her husband at a public market, a common practice for men desperate to escape the harsh economic realities of their lives. In this case, the husband's justification was rooted in financial hardship and the inability to support his family. Desperate to relieve himself of the burdens of his marriage, he sold his wife to a man who could afford to provide for her. Like Catherine's sale, this event caused an uproar among the public, but it was seen as part of a larger trend of desperate men trying to survive in a rapidly changing, unforgiving world. For many, the auction was a symbol of the economic pressures of the time, where men could feel so trapped that they were willing to sell their wives to the highest bidder in hopes of a better life. While these wife sales often caused public scandal and moral outrage, the response from authorities and society was surprisingly indifferent. People were shocked and horrified by the idea of a woman being treated as property, but the sales were rarely condemned with the severity one might expect. Instead, many viewed these events with a mixture of fascination and curiosity, without taking significant action to prevent them. In some cases, public opinion seemed to accept the reality of these transactions, especially among the lower classes, where survival often outweighed moral considerations. Authorities, for their part, were reluctant to intervene, and the legal system largely ignored the practice due to the lack of laws protecting women's rights in marriage. This indifference highlighted the deep societal and legal gaps that allowed such dehumanizing acts to occur with little consequence, and while the events sparked debates, the practice itself was often treated as an unfortunate but necessary evil in a society where men held all the power. Victorian England was a time of profound social and economic change, marked by a stark divide between the rich and the poor. The Industrial Revolution had transformed the economy, but it had also deepened inequality, especially for the working classes. While factory owners and aristocrats amassed wealth, many working men were left to struggle in overcrowded slums with barely enough to feed their families. In this environment, survival became a daily battle, and choices that might seem unimaginable today became desperate measures for those at the bottom of the social ladder. For many men, their wives were seen as yet another financial burden, a responsibility they could neither afford nor escape. With limited options for financial support or avenues for relief, some men turned to the unimaginable act of selling their wives, seeing it as a temporary escape from their dire circumstances. The idea wasn't necessarily one of cruelty, it was about survival in a world where options were few and resources were even fewer. Living in extreme poverty, men who struggled to support their families often felt helpless, trapped by an economy that seemed indifferent to their suffering. For these men, marriage wasn't about love or partnership, it was a contractual obligation that had little to do with affection or mutual respect. When financial pressures mounted, and with no social safety nets or access to resources, men who couldn't provide for their families might have seen wife-selling as a way to survive. To them, it was a practical, albeit tragic, solution, a way to relieve themselves of a financial burden they could no longer bear. It was less about malice and more about the desperation that came with poverty. Selling a wife wasn't seen as an act of cruelty, but rather as an economic transaction, an unfortunate but necessary step to relieve the financial strain they were under. In the Victorian era, women were largely viewed as the property of their husbands. This belief was rooted in deep cultural and legal norms that defined women's roles as subservient and secondary to men. A wife's identity and value were often tied to her husband, her primary function being to manage the household and bear children. This view was so ingrained in Victorian society that some men felt they had the right to dispose of their wives if the marriage became inconvenient, much like they might dispose of any other possession that no longer served its purpose. Divorce was an expensive, complicated process that few could afford, and so, for some men, selling their wives was seen as an alternative to the legal complexities of separation. This sense of ownership over a wife's life led some men to justify the act of selling them in public auctions, reducing women to mere assets in the eyes of society. Despite the moral outrage that wife-selling provoked, it was technically legal in some parts of Victorian England. The legal framework of the time was heavily skewed in favor of men, leaving women with little to no recourse when it came to matters of marriage and personal autonomy. In many cases, the sale of a wife was not seen as a criminal act, but more of a social oddity, an unfortunate consequence of economic pressures and societal norms. Public opinion on the practice was deeply divided. On one side, progressive voices condemned wife sales as a cruel reflection of society's treatment of women, while others viewed it as a necessary evil. In a world where men held the power and women had limited rights, many saw wife sales as a pragmatic solution to the marital and financial troubles of the time. The law simply turned a blind eye, failing to offer the protections women desperately needed. While the practice of wife selling was legal in some areas, it was also a deeply polarizing issue. The concept of a wife being sold like an object sparked outrage in progressive circles, where there were growing calls for reform. These acts were seen as morally reprehensible and as clear evidence of the deeply entrenched patriarchy that governed Victorian society. However, despite the widespread public outcry and the occasional media coverage that would expose such cases, the authorities did little to curb the practice. The societal structures of the time allowed these horrific acts to continue, largely ignored by lawmakers who were more concerned with maintaining the status quo than with providing justice for women. Even when the sales shocked the public, the response from the government was tepid at best, and the practice remained a grim reality throughout much of the Victorian period. The real tragedy of wife-selling, however, lies in the intersection of gender and power. Women in Victorian England had little power to control their own lives, especially once they were married. Once wed, a woman's legal identity was subsumed by her husband's. She had limited rights to her own property, money, or even her own body. The practice of wife-selling was not just an isolated incident, it was a reflection of the wider societal belief that women were the property of men and that they had no autonomy once married. With no legal recourse to escape their marriages, many women were forced to endure whatever their husbands decided for them. This systemic inequality trapped women in relationships they couldn't escape, leaving them to suffer in silence while the rest of society turned a blind eye. The sad reality was that for many women, the law and society offered little protection, and their fate was dictated by the whims of the men who controlled them. By the late Victorian period, the winds of change were beginning to stir. Social reforms, driven by growing awareness and pressure from progressive thinkers, slowly began to challenge the long-held societal norms that allowed practices like wife-selling to persist. The rise of the women's rights movement marked a turning point in how women were viewed by both society and the law. Campaigns for women's suffrage, property rights, and protection from domestic abuse gained traction, pushing for a re-evaluation of the legal and moral frameworks that had supported the subjugation of women. As public opinion began to shift, the legal landscape started to change as well. By the end of the century, wife-selling was no longer seen as an acceptable practice, and its occurrences became far less common, largely due to the growing legal protections and evolving societal values that called for more respect and dignity for women. Alongside the changing social landscape, divorce laws began to evolve, offering women more autonomy and options in cases of marital breakdown. Before these legal reforms, divorce was prohibitively expensive and nearly impossible for women to pursue on their own, especially for the working class. It was a system designed to favor men and keep women locked in unhappy or abusive marriages. But as the law began to shift, divorce became more accessible and in some cases less stigmatized. This legal change rendered the idea of selling one's wife increasingly obsolete. Women could now legally separate from their husbands, at least in some circumstances, and the practice of wife-selling gradually became an anachronism. While it didn't fully disappear overnight, the rise of divorce laws significantly diminished the frequency of wife sales and symbolized a broader societal move towards recognizing women as individuals with their own rights. Alongside legal reforms, a significant cultural shift was underway. As the suffragette movement gained momentum, more and more people began to question the rigid gender roles that had defined Victorian society for centuries. Women began to demand more rights, not just in the legal sense but in their social roles as well. These changing attitudes were integral to the decline of wife-selling. Marriage was no longer seen solely as an economic transaction or a societal obligation. It was becoming, slowly but surely, a partnership. As society began to shift its view on the roles of women and the concept of marriage itself, the idea of owning a wife and trading her away became increasingly unthinkable. The treatment of women was no longer something to be ignored, and with time Victorian social norms began to break down, paving the way for a new era of gender equality and social justice. While the practice of wife-selling may seem like a horrific relic of the past, it serves as a stark reminder of just how deeply entrenched gender inequality was in Victorian England, and just how far we've come since then. In a time when women were viewed as property, men could legally sell their wives in public auctions, reflecting the societal and legal systems that allowed such dehumanizing acts to take place. But thanks to social reforms, changing laws, and the rise of movements like suffrage, the practice slowly faded into history. Today, we can look back at this dark chapter with the understanding that, though women still face challenges in many parts of the world, the progress made over the past century is undeniable. So, what do you think about wife-selling in Victorian times? Could something like this ever happen today, or have we truly left this dark past behind? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinions on how far we've come and where we still need to go. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history and want to keep exploring these untold stories with us, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new Story Wall video. There's so much more history to uncover, and you don't want to miss what's coming next.